The first step carried you into silence, the kind that presses against the skin and waits behind the lungs. Stone walls dripped with memory, their breath damp and cold, whispering with the ghosts of iron wheels. The tunnel did not end, only stretched forward, like a throat swallowing night. Welcome, traveler. Tonight, we walk together through shadows where the past still lingers, and the future refuses to arrive. Now start with first story. You heard the tale before you ever stepped near the tunnel, spoken in half-whispers at bars, in brittle laughter among old men who had lived too long in the valley. They called him the conductor, though the line had been closed since the 60s. The station long since abandoned to weeds and rust. The tracks lay in ruin, devoured by moss. But the tunnel remained, its mouth a wound carved into the mountain, a place where silence pressed like a weight upon the chest. They said if you walked too close on a fog-heavy night, you would see a lantern swaying just inside, its pale glow drifting left to right, as though someone paced with weary precision. No train would follow, no whistle would sound, but the light remained, bobbing like the breath of some endless routine. The stories always began the same. The lantern appeared, the footsteps echoed, and then came the sound of tearing, paper ripped in half, sharp and deliberate, like tickets being collected in a carriage that no longer existed. Some swore they had followed it. A boy once told of stepping into the tunnel, drunk and daring, chasing the light as it receded further and further from reach. He claimed the walls grew tighter as he ran, the echo of his boots too many, too crowded, as if others ran with him. But the light bent at the farthest curve, and when he reached it, there was nothing. Only damp stone, dripping, and the sound of paper still tearing just behind his ear. He did not sleep for weeks. His friends said he left town not long after, unable to bear the weight of silence. The valley itself seemed complicit in the story. Fog rolled off the river most nights, smothering the tracks in a heavy shroud. Old rail workers claimed they could still hear shifts being called at dawn, voices echoing across the trestles where no one walked. They spoke of a train that never arrived, its last conductor too proud or too cursed to leave his post. When the line was shut, they buried him without ceremony, just another name scrolled on a ledger, a life left between timetables. But others whispered that he never truly left, that he kept his lantern lit, searching for passengers who would ride with him forever. The children made dares of it, placing stones just inside the tunnel's threshold to prove they'd entered. Sometimes the stones were gone by morning. Sometimes they were shattered clean in half, as though crushed beneath steel. The bravest left coins, mocking the old ritual of fares. Those coins never stayed. People began to notice footprints near the mouth. Prints too neat, too sharp for the shifting soil. Boots, always boots, pressed deep and wet into the earth, leading inward. They never circled back. You walk there now in memory, the air cool, heavy with the iron tang of rust and stone. Each step echoes with a hollowness that doesn't belong to you alone. The mountain swallows sound, yet gives it back altered. Thicker, slower, as though more than one pair of boots falls upon the ground. You pause at the mouth. The darkness ahead is not simply absence of light, but a substance, something that drips and pools, threatening to spill outward into the night. And then it comes. The glow. Faint at first, a trembling ember, a fragile breath against the heavy dark. It sways, left to right, like a pendulum deciding the measure of your heartbeat. It should be steady, but it falters, sometimes vanishing between swings, as though a hand passes before it, as though someone adjusts the lantern's hood. You strain your ears. There, faint, impossibly faint, the sound of paper. A tear, deliberate, then another, followed by the rustle of something folded away. Tickets, though no train runs. The longer you stand, the more the air shifts. A draft curls outward from the tunnel, damp and sour, carrying with it the smell of coal, of oiled wood, of bodies pressed too close in a carriage long since rotted. The sound grows nearer. Though the light remains just ahead, you swear you feel movement behind you. A shuffle, the scrape of leather soles against stone. But when you turn, the fog is empty, stretching across the valley like a drowned sea. Legends speak of those who approached too close, who let curiosity gnaw deeper than caution. They spoke of figures glimpsed in the corner of vision, pale faces framed in windows that no longer existed, pressed against glass that had shattered decades before. Some described the conductor himself, tall, lean uniform soaked through with rain that never fell, eyes blacker than the tunnel behind him. He said nothing, they claimed. He only extended his hand, palm up, waiting for a fare. And when they could not give it, he tore a ticket anyway, the sound sharp as bone splintering. One story tells of a woman who vanished there. She was seen walking toward the tunnel at dusk, a scarf around her throat. Neighbors found the scarf days later, snagged on a nail at the tunnel's mouth, but no trace of her body. When the fog rolled thick the following week, locals swore they saw her in the lantern's glow, her face pale in the swaying light, lips moving in silent protest, her hand held by the shadow of the conductor. Her eyes followed them until the fog closed once more. The footprints are the most troubling, always fresh, always wet, though no rain falls beneath the mountain's roof. Some measure them, size 11, narrow, the sole pattern of boots not made in half a century. They lead inward, steady, patient. People who follow them rarely speak of what they see, and those who do tell conflicting tales. A platform beneath the earth, a train idling in shadow, its windows blazing though no engine moves, or else a cavernous dark, where only the tearing of tickets persists, layered and endless, as though hundreds board a train that never departs. You imagine the conductor's life, bound by repetition, night after night, pacing, lantern in hand, boots pressing wet into the same stones, never circling back. A purgatory of routine, service without end, collecting fares for a journey that cannot begin. Perhaps he does not know he is dead. Perhaps he knows too well. The line is gone. The passengers are gone, but his duty remains, an anchor heavier than death itself. The lantern flickers once, and you think of how many have seen it, how many have followed. The light bends, always at the same place. The far curve of the tunnel, where stone walls seem to narrow and bend inward like the ribs of a beast. Some say if you stand at that curve, you can feel breath against your neck, warm and insistent, as though the tunnel exhales through you. Some say the conductor's hand will brush your coat, light as a moth, before the sound of paper tearing drowns your thoughts. And when you turn, the lantern will be behind you, not before. The stories never resolve. No bodies return, no clear proof exists. Only the footprints remain, always fresh, always endless. Some nights the fog is so thick, the valley itself seems to dissolve, leaving only the tunnel and its patient glow. On those nights, locals close their shutters, for they know the conductor still paces, lantern swaying like a heartbeat, searching for passengers who will ride with him into the dark. And tonight, as the fog curls around your ankles and the rails hum with memory, you hear it, the tearing of paper, slow and deliberate. It comes not from ahead, but from behind, in the silence you thought was yours. The lantern sways once more. The boots echo deeper. The tunnel breathes. The fog does not lift. The rails hum with something colder than wind, and from within the mountain, a sound rises, less like a voice, more like a song of iron in winter, guiding you toward the next story that waits in the snow. Now start with second story. The storm was said to come without warning. The mountains, already skeletal with winter's hunger, disappeared under veils of white until the world became a blindfold. For 3 days and nights, the blizzard raged, burying valleys, swallowing paths, and sealing the old train tunnel beneath a cathedral of snow. When the winds finally stilled, silence pressed upon the ridges so heavily that men claimed they could hear the bones of the mountain shift. And then, faint at first, but undeniable, the tunnel began to sing. It was not a human melody. No throat could carry a sound so layered, so cavernous, so cold. Icicles clung to the arch like glass teeth, trembling with vibrations that no hand had set. The rails, frozen stiff and strangled by ice, seemed to groan with each gust of air. It was as though the blizzard had left something alive within the stone. A resonance, an after voice, a memory in metal that refused to quiet. Locals told of standing at the valley's edge and hearing it drift through the snow, low and mournful, like a funeral hymn stretched across miles of ice. At night, the sound grew stranger, less like rails groaning and more like choirs of unseen mouths. Old words, perhaps, or not words at all, but syllables bent out of shape by distance and frost. Cattle grew restless, pawing at the frozen earth until hooves bled. Dogs howled until they collapsed, their voices spent. The elders remembered such a storm, though it had not been spoken of for decades. They recalled a rescue team once sent into the tunnel during a similar winter, decades earlier, when an avalanche had blocked the northern entrance. Trapped workers were believed to be inside. The rescuers entered with lanterns and ropes, shouting encouragement into the black. Their voices echoed back wrong, slightly delayed, slightly warped, as though the tunnel listened and rehearsed before replying. And then came the sound of a train, distant but rushing nearer, the whistle sharp enough to cut through the storm. Yet the line had been closed for years. When the rescuers did not return, others followed. They found no men, no footprints, no tools, only lanterns guttering faintly in the snow, their glass cloudy, their flames thin and pale as dying eyes. The ropes lay twisted into the ice as though pulled by something vast, and when unwound, their fibers hummed like strings plucked by invisible hands. Those who touched them swore they felt a rhythm, as if the ropes had become veins, pulsing with a heartbeat not their own. That was the last rescue attempt. The mountain was left to its silence and the storm passed, as storms do. But each generation carried the memory. And when another blizzard sealed the ridge years later, the fear returned like a wound reopened. And when the tunnel sang once more, even the young listened with dread. You imagine the sound now, standing in the valley as the sky bruises with snow. The air cuts deep, sharp as knives of glass against the lungs. Wind carves ghostly shapes along the ridges, bending trees into skeletal arches. Ahead, the tunnel's mouth is no longer stone and steel, but a frozen cavern, its teeth draped with icicles long as spears. Each one trembles, not with the wind, but with vibrations rising from within. Notes struck in a sequence too precise to be chance. They sway like strings on some vast hidden instrument, plucked by fingers that do not tire. The melody crawls into the bones. At first it is mournful, a low groan stretched thin across the dark. Then, layered beneath it, come higher tones, shrill and piercing, like voices crying through glass. The notes do not follow one another but overlap, building in dissonance until they press against the skull. A chorus without end. You stagger closer, and the sound shifts, aligning to your breath, your pace, as though adjusting itself to fit your presence. There were those who believed the tunnel itself had learned to mimic, that when the blizzard sealed it, when snow clogged its throat and ice froze its ribs, it began to remember every sound trapped within. The echoes of trains, of whistles, of boots, of laughter and shouts, all of it replayed, twisted, until the stone carried its own language. They said the mountain had grown jealous of voices, and so it stole them, replayed them, kept them forever. One legend told of a boy who tested this belief. He crept to the tunnel's edge with a violin, the only sound brave enough to answer the winter hymn. He played 3 notes, quick and sharp, into the hollow dark. For a moment silence fell. Then the tunnel answered, not with 3, but with 30, multiplied and twisted, each one bent sharper than the last, until the air screamed with the imitation. He ran home, weeping, his bow hand trembling, and never played again. The storm always finds its victims. Once, a group of woodcutters was caught in the blizzard. When their families searched, they found only axes embedded in frozen trunks, their handles humming with vibration. No footprints led away. Their voices were heard instead in the tunnel's song, calling names that had not been uttered aloud by strangers. You step closer, and the cold deepens into something more than temperature. The air itself thickens, weighted, pressing into the skin with fingers unseen. The notes change again, no longer distant. They rise from beneath the snow, from the rails themselves, as though iron were a throat straining to sing. Your own breath catches, and for an instant you hear it, your own name, threaded into the hymn. It does not sound like your voice, but like something that has practiced it for years, bending syllables until they no longer fit. The lanterns return in memory. Those who carried them into the storm said their flames thinned, growing pale until they were nearly transparent. The light no longer pushed back the dark, but bent around it, as though the air itself swallowed illumination. Survivors, few though they were, spoke of looking down at their own lanterns and seeing other faces reflected in the glass. Faces not present, eyes staring from beyond the veil of flame. When the rescuers stumbled back into daylight, their voices never aligned again. Words came staggered, syllables mistimed, as though someone else spoke just behind their mouths. It is said that some nights, when the blizzard lifts, you can still hear them. Voices layered deep within the tunnel's hymn, repeating the same pleas: rope, lantern, help. But the notes bend, turning the words into mockery, until the mountain itself seems to laugh. The song does not end, even now, as you stand at the frozen mouth. It grows, notes folding upon notes, tones that grind against one another until silence feels like a mercy denied. And the longer you linger, the more the sound seems to know you. Each crack of ice resembles your step. Each hum of iron mirrors your breath. The tunnel has learned, and it will not forget. The snow begins to fall again, soft at first, then heavier, blanketing the valley until only white remains. The tunnel's hymn rises, triumphant, resonant, eternal, a choir of steel and frost. You close your eyes and hear the whistle of a train that no longer exists, rushing through the buried tracks, its roar swallowing your heartbeat whole. And when you open them, the rails beneath the snow are trembling, vibrating as though something vast moves beneath, as though the mountain itself prepares to rise. The rails do not quiet. They hum with a memory older than men, each note carrying the sound of those who vanished before. And from the buried dark, where the mountain's throat yawns open, a new voice joins the song, guiding you toward the story of a passenger who never returned. Now start with third story. His name was Matthew Kresna, though the papers never lingered on it for long. Just another disappearance, they said. Another careless student swallowed by winter roads or poor judgment. But those who remembered him, his friends, his mother, spoke of how it began with something much simpler. A train ride he should never have taken. It was late October, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs, when Matthew boarded the midnight service that cut through the valley. The train hadn't run regularly in years, just an occasional maintenance car or rerouted freight. Yet somehow, that night, the platform lit up. Security cameras flickered with sudden electricity, their recordings stammering, as though time itself caught its breath. He had been seen there, backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder, headphones pressed into his ears. His phone playlist still lingered in the cloud, a string of tracks no one thought twice about. Indie rock, a little jazz, ambient music for study nights. He walked with the distracted ease of someone who believed he was invincible, as all young men do, stepping onto the carriage without hesitation. Witnesses disagreed on the details. One old attendant swore the car had been dark, unlit, dust coating the seats. Another said the lights burned too bright, fluorescent hums filling the night with a sterile unease. But all agreed on one thing. Once Matthew boarded, the doors shut with a weighty finality, though no driver had been seen. The train rolled into the tunnel, steel grinding against steel, echoing through stone ribs that stretched forever. It should have emerged minutes later, on the other side of the ridge. It never did. For 2 days, the authorities searched. Patrols swept the tracks, combing ballast and brush. They found nothing. No wreck, no derailment, no disturbance in the rails. It was as if the train had been swallowed whole by the mountain. On the third day, they discovered his camera. It lay between the ties, half buried in gravel slick with rain. Its screen was cracked, the battery swollen, but the SD card remained intact. When the footage was recovered, a hush fell over the investigation room. The first minutes showed nothing unusual. Matthew's own hand adjusting the lens, his voice muffled as he muttered about documenting the weird late-night service for a school project. He laughed once, shaking the camera so the picture blurred. Then came the interior. Rows of seats, faded blue fabric worn thin, windows fogged with condensation. The carriage was empty, but the reflections were not. In the glass of the windows, figures sat upright, row upon row of passengers, their outlines blurred, their faces indistinct, but their stillness was unbearable. They did not shift, did not breathe, did not blink. They simply stared forward, motionless, even as Matthew walked the aisle, oblivious. The reflections remained where he was not, existing only in the periphery, as though the camera lens caught what his eyes could not. The footage grew stranger. At intervals, the train jolted, though Matthew's balance did not falter. The sound of wheels over track deepened, metallic, echoing like something larger than rails. His voice faded beneath a heavier noise, a low hum, like engines grinding far underground. Then the screen flickered. When the picture returned, Matthew was gone. The camera sat on a seat, tilted toward the aisle. The carriage was empty. Empty, but the reflections were not. Dozens of pale faces pressed against the glass, their mouths open, their throats moving, though no sound emerged. The footage ended there, clicking into static. The police dismissed it. They said the card had been corrupted, that visual noise and compression artifacts explained the shapes in the glass. They labeled the case unsolved and let it sink beneath paperwork. But his mother never stopped searching. She stood at the tunnel's mouth, night after night, even in snow, clutching a pair of his broken headphones. She said she could hear his music in the wind. Not whole songs, never that, but fragments, loops, notes cut short, as if a hand pressed pause on the air itself. The sound was thin, tinny, warped, as though carried through speakers underwater. Yet it was his. Others began to notice too. Travelers passing by the valley swore they heard faint melodies drifting from the tunnel at night. Some even recognized them. Songs released on vinyl in the 80s, ballads from the 40s, hymns no living ear recalled. It was as if every voice, every sound carried into that place, lingered, replayed, spliced into the mountain's endless archive. Rumors grew. A student claimed she'd been walking home one night when she saw a train pass silently along the dead track. Its windows glowed, its carriages blurred, but its sound was absent. No whistle, no grind of steel. She swore she saw Matthew inside, seated near the back, his headphones on, his eyes vacant. She shouted his name. The train did not slow. Its lights vanished into the tunnel, and she was left with only frost in the air, where breath should have been. The story spread across campus. Some dismissed it as myth, others dared to test it. They carried recorders into the valley, pressed microphones to the tunnel stones, and listened. Most returned with nothing but static, but a few captured more. Faint music, yes, but threaded with something else. A voice. Matthew's voice whispering fractured words. Not alone, please. Before cutting into silence, the authorities cautioned against obsession. They said the mountain was dangerous, the tunnel unstable, that echoes and vibrations could trick the mind. But those who had heard the recordings knew better. The pauses, the stutters, the abrupt endings were not natural. They were interruptions, as though something larger consumed the sound before it finished. Years passed. His mother aged, yet on certain nights, her neighbors said they saw her standing by the tracks, her hair whipped white by wind, her lips moving with unheard words. She claimed he still answered, that when the storm howled, when the valley shook, his music threaded through the chaos, reaching for her across the divide. And sometimes, when others walked too near, they heard it too. The faint beat of drums, the lonely strum of guitar, the whisper of a boy's voice singing against silence. The train never returned. No official report ever acknowledged its last journey, but the story persisted. Students lit candles near the tunnel's edge each October, placing headphones around them as offerings. Some said the flames bent toward the darkness, drawn inward by something hungry. Some swore the candles went out without wind, extinguished by breath that no one felt, and the valley still remembers. The tunnel still hums, the rails still vibrate with the weight of journeys unfinished. Perhaps Matthew was only the first. Perhaps the carriage still waits for passengers, filling with reflections that do not belong to the living. You imagine stepping aboard yourself, the smell of dust thick in the lungs, the glass trembling with blurred faces. You imagine sitting down, pressing headphones to your ears, and hearing not music, but silence. Perfect, endless silence. And in that silence, you realize you are no longer listening. You are being listened to. The wind drags faint notes across the valley, each one broken, unfinished, as though caught in a loop, and somewhere inside the mountain's hollow throat, a lantern stirs, guiding lost travelers deeper, toward the glow of lights that no human hand holds. Now start with fourth story. The mountain kept its secrets best at night. By day it was only stone, scarred by wind, thick with fir and pine. But when dusk sank over its ridges, the tunnel mouth became something else entirely. An eye cut into the rock, gazing out into the valley, unblinking. Those who lingered too long near that hollow swore they felt it notice them. It was hikers who first carried the story. Drawn by the silence of the region, the thrill of exploring forgotten places, their boots left prints in mud slick with melted snow, their breath steaming as they approached the old line that hadn't seen a working train in generations. The first man to vanish was named Callahan, a park ranger off duty, known for his skepticism. He joked with his friends that he'd go find the mole people with their candles. His laughter echoed down the tunnel. The others said it echoed too long, stretching, thinning, until it no longer sounded like him at all. Then came the lights. At first faint, like fireflies in fog, the glow wavered deep inside the tunnel. Orange, warm and impossibly steady, not the sputter of flame, not the sterile pulse of electricity, something between. The hikers debated whether it was a trick of vision, some reflection from their headlamps. But when they switched their lights off, the orange remained, swaying slightly, as if carried by unseen hands. Callahan followed. He stepped forward with the confidence of someone who refused to believe in fear. The sort of man who believed stone could only be stone. His footsteps faded into the dark. His voice followed. "See, nothing down here." Then silence. The group waited for his return, calling his name, their echoes climbing the tunnel's ribs. But no answer came, only the faint clatter of pebbles as though something shifted beneath their feet. Far deeper in, the orange light moved, retreating farther, drawing him with it. They never saw him again. That night, the others fled, stumbling down the mountain trail. When they returned at dawn with search teams, they found no body, no trace of Callahan, only his pack and jacket, neatly folded, placed at the tunnel's mouth. Around them, the gear of his friends, water bottles, knives, gloves, had been arranged in a circle. Not dropped, not scattered, arranged. The police chalked it up to panic, human error. They said someone in the group had staged it in shock, but the hikers swore otherwise. They claimed the gear was cold to the touch, damp with condensation, though the morning had been dry, as if the mountain had exhaled upon them. Word spread. Locals began to avoid the place. Even those who had no patience for superstition found themselves turning back on trails that led too near the tunnel. Farmers swore their cattle shied from that side of the valley, refusing to graze. At night, the few who lingered claimed they saw faint orange glows drifting just beyond the tree line, weaving between the trunks like lanterns carried on a procession. Still, there were always those drawn to mystery. Students, drifters, amateur ghost hunters. They came with cameras, with recorders, with bravado. Some returned shaken, swearing the mountain whispered as they passed, their names sliding across stone like the scrape of boots. Some returned laughing, dismissing the stories as backwoods myths, and some never returned at all. One recovered camera told its own tale. The footage began with 3 hikers joking at the tunnel's mouth, their voices bright with youthful arrogance. As they entered, their lamps illuminated only rock, arches stained with soot, water dripping in slow rhythm. But soon the orange lights appeared, several of them hovering in the distance, steady as stars. The camera wavered. The boys argued over whether to chase them. Then came the sound. Not a train, not wind, but voices, a layered murmur, dozens speaking at once, too low to distinguish words. At moments the noise surged, rising like a chant. At others it fell to a hush, so soft it seemed to breathe against the microphone. The hikers pressed on. The stones beneath their boots glistened with moisture, though the air around them grew colder, sharper. One boy muttered about the smell, like old smoke, like metal left in rain. Then the voices changed. No longer a crowd, but something more intimate. They began to hear familiar tones. One swore he heard his sister's voice, another his dead grandfather's. Each hiker reacted differently. One laughed nervously, another wept, another shouted back into the dark. The camera shook violently, and then, just as the orange lights brightened, the footage ended. No scream, no collapse, only static, like the tape itself had been chewed through. When searchers entered days later, the only trace they found was the hiker's gear, once again arranged in a circle at the tunnel's mouth. This time, the circle was wider, precise, every object placed as though part of a ritual. In its center, the camera. Locals began to whisper. The lanterns, they said, were not lanterns at all, but the eyes of those who had gone before. Lost souls carrying fragments of fire, luring the living deeper so the mountain might keep them. Others claimed it was no mountain at all, but something older that lived beneath it, breathing through stone, hungry for offerings. Travel writers who once boasted of the region stopped mentioning the place. Maps shifted. The tunnel was left unnamed. Only those who already knew could find it. And still, sometimes, when dusk settled and fog clung low, faint orange glows moved in the forest, always in pairs, always swaying, like a lantern held just out of reach. You imagine walking there yourself, boots crunching against gravel slick with rain, hearing whispers brush your ears in voices you once loved. You imagine seeing the glow ahead, steady, patient, waiting for you to step closer, and you wonder, if you followed, whether you would find the lantern or become it. By dawn, the mountain lay silent, the circle of belongings untouched, damp with the breath of stone. Yet as the valley winds rose, the faintest hum threaded through the trees, like rails shivering, like something vast stirring deeper below. Now start with fifth story. The timetable appeared where no one expected it, found half buried in silt near the riverbank, its cover swollen with damp, its paper yellowed with decades. And yet, when unfolded, the ink glistened as if written only yesterday. The year was 1922, but the names of the lines were strange. Routes never laid, tunnels never carved, destinations that seemed both familiar and impossible. The man who discovered it, a collector of railway relics, thought himself lucky. He wiped it clean with careful fingers, marveling at the precision of its typeface, the ornate stamps declaring "on time" on every entry. No smudges, no errors. Even the station names he did not recognize had the weight of authenticity. And at the bottom of each page, a signature in looping script, "The Conductor." It became a curiosity among his friends, a piece of forgotten history. He displayed it in his home, a fragile relic behind glass. But then the accidents began. A guest swore the table's dates shifted overnight. Another claimed that while staring at the pages, she heard the faint groan of brakes, the hiss of steam. Once, when a visitor read a departure aloud, the house itself trembled. A glass fell from the shelf, shattering at their feet. The collector dismissed these claims as nerves, imagination, but he admitted one detail he could not explain. Each time he checked the timetable, the ink was still damp, bleeding faintly into the paper as though it had been freshly pressed. Word of the timetable spread. Historians came, archivists, even priests. None could explain its condition, nor its inaccuracies. The tunnels it listed, the hollow line, the Stonemouth route, the endless spur, had never been recorded on any map. Yet each bore specific times, exact minutes, always followed by the promise, "on time." It wasn't until the collector's nephew stole it that the legend darkened. The boy was 16, restless, more daring than wise. He slipped the timetable into his backpack one evening and showed it off to his friends at the edge of the disused tunnel. They sat in the cold, their lantern light bouncing off damp stone, reading the departures aloud as if conjuring spells. The ground shuddered beneath them. Stones rattled loose, water dripped in sudden rhythm. The boys laughed nervously until a sound drifted from within. The steady churn of wheels on rails far below, impossibly deep. A whistle cut the night air, faint yet sharp, followed by the rush of something vast pressing through stone. They saw the glow then, a headlight blooming in the dark. It grew larger, brighter, yet never nearer, fixed at a distance, as if caught in some eternal approach. The air grew hot, then cold. One boy swore he felt wind against his face, though the tunnel remained still. Panic overtook them. They fled, scrambling from the tunnel. The timetable clutched tight. Behind them, echoes lingered. The slam of carriage doors, the scrape of boots, a conductor's call in a language none understood. The boy never returned the timetable. He kept it, hidden beneath his bed, convinced it was a link to something powerful. But each night the sounds grew louder. The whistle pierced his dreams, the ground beneath his room thrumming with phantom rails. Some mornings he awoke to find soot on his sheets, fine black dust that left no trace elsewhere in the house. His parents worried. His friends avoided him, and then one winter night, he disappeared. His window was open, his bed cold. On the floor lay the timetable, opened to a fresh page. At the top, in ink that glistened wet, passenger boarded. The handwriting was not the same as before. Others claimed to see him still, a figure waiting near the tunnel mouth, his face pale, his backpack slung across his shoulder. In his hands, the timetable fluttered, as though caught in an endless draft. Lantern light revealed his features blurred, his lips moving in silent recitation of times that would never come. The timetable resurfaced months later, tucked between the shelves of a second-hand bookstore miles from the valley. The owner swore he had never acquired it. When asked, he only said it was always there. Again, it drew attention. Again, it was taken. Each new keeper repeated the cycle. Fascination, then unease, then vanishing. The pages seemed to multiply. One reader swore the times updated daily, each departure tied to a name he did not know until the following morning, when he read of a missing person in the newspaper. The departure and the disappearance always aligned. Priests tried to burn it. The flames licked the edges but left no ash. Historians locked it in vaults, only to find it gone the next morning, neatly placed at some railway platform, waiting like lost luggage. No chain, no lock, no barrier could contain it. And the ink, always damp. Some began to whisper that the timetable was not written by men, but by the tunnel itself. A record of debts collected, passages promised. Each on-time stamp marked not trains, but souls. And the tunnels that never existed, perhaps they did, just not in this world. Travelers who carried it swore they felt the vibration of unseen wheels beneath their feet. On certain nights, when the moon was veiled and the wind hushed, they claimed the tunnel yawned wider, its darkness thicker, its breath colder, and through that darkness, the glow of a train passing, doors slamming, windows streaked with condensation, passengers with faces pale and unblinking. The trains never stopped. Their lights never reached the end. One last account survived in a letter. A woman wrote that she had held the timetable only once, borrowed from a friend who collected oddities. She read a single line aloud. Midnight departure, Stonemouth route. She swore the ground trembled, the lamp beside her flickering, and then faintly, she heard music, the thin distant notes of a violin, playing beneath the wheels. She returned the timetable immediately, refusing to touch it again. But in her letter's final words, She confessed something she never told anyone. Each night since, she woke to the sound of a whistle far below, and the feeling of a ticket stub clenched in her fist. By morning, the timetable had vanished once more, leaving only the faint odor of soot and iron. And in the silence that followed, the rails seemed to stir, humming as if some hidden journey had already begun, its path leading toward a shadow waiting just ahead. Now start with 6 Story. It surfaced in a cardboard box at a yard sale, a VHS tape, unlabeled except for 3 words scribbled in black marker, static, on rails. The plastic smelled faintly of mildew, and the spools inside carried a film of dust, but the tape itself was intact. A collector of retro tech bought it for $1, expecting nothing more than a forgotten home movie or a taped-over broadcast. The tape's first moments were ordinary enough. Grainy color, washed-out frames of a man laughing into the lens. His voice was nervous, the sound tinny, as he explained he had taken his camera out to see what the tunnel looks like at night. The year's date flickered in the corner, 1987. He filmed the walk to the tunnel, his breath forming pale clouds in the cold. The camera stuttered each time he laughed too loud, his voice bouncing against stone and brush. "See?" he said. "Just an old line. Nothing scary." But the tape disagreed. As he stepped into the mouth of the tunnel, static ghosted across the screen. Not the usual white fuzz of interference, but jagged, pulsing shapes that seemed to gnaw at the edges of the image. They flickered like teeth, snapping in uneven rhythm, as if the tape itself resisted being played. The cameraman joked at first, saying the lens needed cleaning, but his laughter cracked thin. The longer he recorded, the worse it grew. The walls warped, the shadows bleeding into one another. At times, the man's own body split into duplicate frames, one half a beat behind, his arm trailing like an afterimage. Then the sound began to fade, not all at once, but in layers, peeling away like skin. First, the ambient hiss of the tape vanished, leaving a hollow quiet. Then his footsteps muted, though his boots still struck stone. His voice thinned, syllables stretching and breaking into whispers, until only fragments slipped through. "Don't like," and "closer," and "hear that." The static thickened. Viewers who watched the tape decades later swore the static wasn't random at all. Freeze any frame, and you could glimpse outlines in the interference. Faces pressed too close, mouths wide, eyes blacked out. They were not the cameraman's face, nor any reflection of him, but something layered inside the tape, something looking out. The footage lurched suddenly. The cameraman spun toward the far end of the tunnel. A light had bloomed there, faint, steady, like the headlamp of an approaching train. He swore under his breath, "No trains here. Hasn't been for years." Yet the light did not move closer. It hovered, constant, as though waiting. And then the shadows appeared. Row by row, they filled the frame. Passengers, dozens of them, seated in neat lines along invisible benches carved from the tunnel walls. Their faces were blurred, obscured by grain, but their posture was unmistakable, upright, forward-facing, as though waiting for departure. The cameraman's voice broke. Are you seeing this?" But no answer came. His words echoed into nothing. The camera zoomed, the lens trembling. Each passenger's face was a smear of shadow, but their heads turned slightly, in unison. All eyes, though eyes could not be seen, fixed on him. And then the tape skipped. The image flickered, rewound, replayed. The same moment, repeated again and again, the cameraman gasping, zooming closer, the passengers turning. Each time it grew worse, the static gnawing deeper, the faces sharper. until they seemed pressed against the glass of the screen itself. Finally, the loop broke. The camera swayed violently, falling to the ground. The view tilted sideways, capturing only stone and damp rails. For long minutes nothing moved. Only static writhed across the picture, twitching in insect-like bursts. Then faintly, the cameraman's shoes appeared in frame. He walked back, slow, deliberate, as though guided. But when he leaned into view, it was not the same man. He was seated now, among the passengers. His mouth was open, frozen mid-scream, but no sound came through. His eyes stared forward, glassy, as if locked in endless waiting. The static grew thicker, chewing at the frame, until his image fractured into 1,000 ghostly replicas. The tape clicked. It did not end, not properly. It rewound itself, though no VCR should allow that, and played again from the start. The same laughter, the same walk, the same descent, always ending with the cameraman seated among the passengers. Those who owned the tape swore it behaved strangely in their homes. It rewound in the night. It clicked inside boxes, as though eager to play itself. Some claimed to hear voices spilling from their old VCRs even when the power was off. Layered murmurs, chanting rhythms, a train whistle, low and hollow. Archivists tried to digitize it, but each attempt failed. Hard drives corrupted, files deleted themselves. Even when screenshots were captured, they dissolved into blank pixels upon reopening. The footage refused to exist anywhere but on tape, as though bound to magnetic ribbon. One archivist reported that late at night, he played the tape again, unable to stop himself. He froze a frame of the passengers in the blur of faces. He recognized someone, his father, who had died a year before. The next time he played it, the frame had changed. Another face he knew, his own. No one knows how many times the tape changed hands. It surfaces, disappears, resurfaces again, always unmarked, except for the words, static, on rails. Always intact. Its spools unbroken, its inked letters unfaded. And each time it is played, the same story repeats. Laughter, descent, static, passengers. A loop without end. A loop that consumes its recorder. Some whisper that the tape is not simply a recording, but a door. That each play strengthens the tunnel it depicts, widens its mouth, adds another passenger to its phantom train. And that one day, when the final frame is reached, the train will not stay seated. It will rise, and it will arrive. Until then, the tape waits, silent, patient, rewinding itself in the dark. By morning, the VCR spat out nothing but dust, the spools inside empty, the label faintly smeared as if licked by static itself. And yet, in the hush that followed, the faint crackle of unseen rails lingered, carrying the promise of another signal waiting to break through. Now start with seventh story. It began as nothing more than routine travel. Workers, inspectors, and the occasional wanderer cutting across the mountain line. The tunnel was long, the maintenance car plain, nothing but a narrow carriage with cracked vinyl seats, peeling advertisements for long-dead products, and buzzing fluorescent lights that hummed faintly overhead. They called it the crossing car. Not quite a passenger train, not quite a freight car, but a shabby in-between, a carriage hitched to whatever engine happened to be running, ferrying bodies from one side of the mountain to the other. The stories agree on one thing. The journey never should have taken more than 15 minutes, but those who came back said otherwise. The first witness, a linesman named Alvarez, boarded alone on a mist-heavy morning. He remembered the smell of rust, the damp metal floor, the flickering light over his seat. The car jerked forward, rattling into the tunnel, and he settled in for the short ride. But when the end should have arrived, the carriage lurched instead into another. The doors slid open with a groan. It was the same car. The same cracked floor. The same peeling advertisement of a smiling family holding bottles of soda that hadn't been sold since the 1970s. He stepped through, half amused, assuming the car had looped around, or that he had dozed off, but the engine rumbled again, and the next door opened to reveal another identical carriage, and another and another. He walked until his legs trembled, until the fluorescent buzz drilled into his skull. Hours passed, though no watch ticked, no clock marked the time. He swore the advertisements grew paler with each car, their edges curling inward like rotting leaves. Some seats bore scratches that hadn't been there before. One cushion had a dent shaped as though someone had just risen from it. But Alvarez was alone. When rescue crews found him wandering the opposite tunnel exit, he was gaunt, eyes ringed with shadow. He spoke of dozens of carriages, each identical but not quite. The same room, remade imperfectly, as if copied by a hand that kept forgetting small details. No one believed him, not until others returned with the same story. A pair of students, a night guard, a ticket inspector sent to check abandoned lines. Each one swore the carriage repeated itself, folding forward into infinity. They said the floor trembled beneath their feet, but no engine was ever seen. The windows revealed nothing but black rock, though sometimes, faintly, shadows slipped across the glass, as though something paced just beyond sight. And always, the advertisements, they seemed alive, shifting subtly between cars. A poster for cigarettes showed a man smiling too widely in one carriage, then expressionless in the next, then blurred in the next after that. A child holding ice cream appeared older by a year each time. In one account, the child was no longer human at all, his eyes hollow, his hands stretched too long. Some swore the advertisements whispered, not in words, exactly, but in the hiss of static, the scrape of paper curling, a sound that tickled the ear, urging them forward, deeper, into the next identical room. The strangest account came from a woman named Mara, who vanished for 3 days before stumbling into town barefoot, her coat shredded at the hem. She claimed the carriages did not only repeat forward, but backward as well. When she tried to retreat, the way behind her collapsed into the same infinite sequence. At one point, she turned to find another passenger seated at the far end of the car, motionless, head bowed. When she gathered courage to approach, the figure looked up. It was her own face, staring back, pale and emptied, lips mouthing words she could not hear. She ran. By the time she emerged, her voice was raw from screaming, though she could not recall making a sound. Investigators tested the tunnels, measuring distance, counting steps, shining floodlights. Each time, the crossing car behaved like an ordinary carriage. 15 minutes in, 15 minutes out. No endless halls, no flickering clones. Skeptics dismissed the stories as tricks of exhaustion, hallucinations, shared hysteria. But the workers whispered otherwise. They said the endless carriage only appeared when the mountain was restless, when the wind carried a low whistle and the tunnel walls sweated with damp. They said you couldn't choose to enter it. The carriage chose you, and once chosen, you would never forget the feeling of the floor trembling with engines that did not exist. One conductor, old and half-blind, swore he had glimpsed it only once. He saw the maintenance car slide past him in the dark, no engine attached, its lights buzzing like a hive. He thought he saw faces pressed to the windows, dozens of them, staring forward in silence. Yet when he blinked, the car was gone, the rails empty. Others told of hearing it at night, a rhythm of wheels turning without weight, echoing down the line though no train passed. The sound grew louder if you listened, until it seemed to come from behind your very head, as though the carriage rattled just above your ceiling, moving through air instead of track. And then there were the disappearances, not many, just a handful over decades, but enough. Workers stepping onto the car and never stepping off again. Their names scribbled in old reports, their bodies never found. Some say they are still inside, seated among the peeling posters, watching the same advertisements curl to dust. Forever passengers on a train that moves but never arrives. Those who returned often carried something with them. Alvarez had splinters of wood in his shoes from benches that hadn't existed in the real carriage. Mara's coat was torn in patterns that looked like claw marks, though no animal had touched her. The students brought back a folded paper, wedged into one of the seats. It was an advertisement no one recognized. Faded, blurred, showing a destination scrawled in a language they could not read. When pressed, they admitted the paper hadn't been there when they boarded. What unnerves archivists most, that is how consistent the testimonies are. Details shift, but the bones remain identical. The endless carriages, the buzzing lights, the trembling beneath unseen wheels, and always the same sensation creeping over them all, the certainty that the train was not carrying them forward, but holding them still, waiting for something else to arrive. Some whisper that the endless carriage is not part of any train at all, but a fragment of something older, a place that fell into the rail system like a shard of broken glass, a loop stitched into steel, fed by the electricity of motion, growing longer with each traveler who enters. And if that's true, then every passenger inside is not lost, but stored, waiting. And if one night, as you sit alone in a station, you hear the faint buzz of lights and the rumble of wheels that never arrive, do not step forward when the carriage opens. For once you board, you may walk forever and never reach the door that leads back out.